Welcome to you, stranger. My name is Old Video Master. I am the 1984 CBS Fox VHS. Why are you here? To see Ritrovata? No, not Ritrovata. Is it MGM, maybe? No, maybe not even MGM. You want to make a revisionist release? Well, for that you have come to the right place, if you use your head. That's because everybody here uses a very flawed master, or else their releases are dead. What do you want to buy? Some bad color timing? Bad audio remixes? You don't buy, you sell. You sell releases in exchange for gold. You will get rich here, or your disc will be killed. VHS tolls the bell once again.
It's not smart to go wandering so far from home. I reckon he picked the wrong video trail.
Or he could have picked the wrong film.
His big mistake, I think, was getting born.
If you want any video work looking like that, you could try being an archival scarecrow.
Oh no, the revisionist crows are liable to scare him, maybe.
Hello?
Salud.
You can't get rich like that. At most, you will only succeed in your release being killed.
With all of the trouble we have, all we needed was another label. What are you looking for?
Video rights and some good elements to work with. Never saw a film's preservation status as dead as this one.
You will never see another like it.
What's wrong with the preservation status?
We've had too many transfer killings. You have seen the discs? None of them are discs. They're film widows. The place has only film widows. Here you can only gain respect by killing other films, so nobody works anymore.
Seems somebody doesn't share your opinion.
Salud. Know why the 1985 CBS Fox Laserdisc looked you over? To take your measurements. You're so experienced they can do it with a glance. You will be a customer. Don't laugh. I'm not joking. I want to warn you that those film murderers will make a corpse out of your disc one day. That's why I want you to get out of here. You don't want to stay in this film cemetery. Finish up and get out.
Who are they?
Studios, bandits, and smugglers. They come down from Los Angeles. They cross the frontier to stock up on processed picture and sound. The cost is much less here. Then they go back and sell the picture and sound to the consumers.
Any town that sells picture and sound has got to be a rich one.
Not the town. Only those who buy and sell, and the rights holders are the ones who clean up.
Yeah, somebody has to run the place. Every film has a rights holder.
That's true, but when there are two around, then I would say that there is one too many.
2 rights holders. Very interesting.
Interesting is right. The Ritrovata boys who sell revisionist masters. And then there's MGM, big film merchants. If I'm not mistaken, you already met MGM's gang, didn't you?
Yeah, we met.
But you're lucky. They don't usually limit their fire to the film. A label leaves his own land and looks around for any reason. VHS tolls the bell and Laserdisc sells another coffin.
The MGM over there, the Ritrovata there. Me right in the middle.
Well, you do what?
Crazy VHS tape was right. There's money to be made on a film like this.
If you're thinking what I suspect, I tell you, don't try it.
Don Miguel Ritrovata, I want to talk to you. Don Miguel, I hear you're hiring on labels. Well, I might just be available. I gotta tell you before you hire me, I don't work cheap. Get 3 video coffins ready.
Listen, stranger label, didn't you get the idea? We don't like to see bad labels like you in town. Go get your film. You let him get away from you?
Now see, that's what I want to talk to you about. It's feeling real bad.
Huh?
My film. You see, he got all riled up when you men went and fired those revisionist shots at his feet.
Hey, are you making some kind of joke?
No. See, I understand you discs were just playing around. But the film, it just doesn't get it. Of course, if you were to all apologize. I don't think it's nice you laughing. You see, my film don't like people laughing. It gets the crazy idea you're laughing in it. Now, if you apologize like I know you're going to, I might convince it that you really didn't mean it. My mistake. 4 video coffins.
Keep me covered. I'm going to take care of those 2.
Listen, MGM! You can have them now if you like. Since dead films can't talk.
It seems they didn't like my joke. We'll let them go home in a little while. good mastering. Very good mastering. When you want to kill a film, you must shoot for its heart. And the revisionist 4K master is the best weapon. That's very nice, but I'll stick with my archival mindset. When a label with an archival mindset meets a rights holder with a revisionist 4K scan, the label with the archival mindset will have a dead disc. That's an old Mexican video proverb, and it's true. You believe that? Defective Mono Remix. Take 5 men and escort A Fistful of Dollars to the small house. Hello?
Hello and welcome back to this damnful idealistic crusade. In this video I'll be discussing the restoration, Blu-ray, and 4K UHD release from Arrow Video of Sergio Leone's 1964 masterpiece, A Fistful of Dollars, the first of the Dollars trilogy and the first film to be released as part of Arrow Video's new restoration and rollout of the whole trilogy as individual deluxe limited edition releases that will all nicely go together on your shelf. This is a complete overhaul project for all three films, which attempts to correct as many long-standing element problems and transfer problems that have plagued these films since their original release in the 1960s. This has been compounded further by an entire lifetime of edits and element problems and preservation issues, and then being split between different entities and 2 different countries, and having elements all over the place, and then having a variety of video transfer issues be introduced over time. So these films really required this level of effort a long time ago, and unfortunately, past restoration attempts have never gone to this level of trying to fix and address problems, and a lot of the past efforts unfortunately introduced new problems. So for all 3 films, there has never been a proper video presentation that was archivally minded and didn't have some major glaring issue or transfer problem or was coming from lesser elements. So there has never before been a video release that was as good as it could be, that addressed a lot of these issues, that had brand new restoration work put in, that took the time to get as much original elements as possible and not have any issues in the new transfer and restoration work that was done. The 3 films have fared a bit differently in terms of which has a more accurate or a less problematic video history or modern video release, but none of them have been at the level they should be at. But this is the first time an outside entity, being Arrow Video, has stepped in to put in the effort and deal with not only the American rights holders, which is now, of course, MGM Amazon, but also the Italian rights holders, because you have to deal with both sides, and of course get all of the elements you can from both parties, but also dealing with all of the work that has been done by the Ritrovata labs in Italy, who have produced all of the modern scans and masters that were released by Kino Lorber here in the US on their Blu-ray and UHD releases. But Arrow also extended an olive branch and got the participation and cooperation of every Leone expert they could, including the leading members and Leone experts in the fan preservation and fan historian community. So if you're at all in the fan preservation scene, you will recognize some of the names in the thank you credits. And I must preface all of this that I myself was able to assist in some small capacity, particularly here on Fistful to a degree with the audio restoration. So this is really the first time you have full cooperation from all parties involved, a label stepping in to put in an incredible amount of work to try and get this release and the release of the other 2 films as good as they possibly can with the elements and materials that are available, but also involving the fan historian and preservation community to try and make this release as good as it can be, and something that could finally be called a proper restoration of the film. And this, of course, goes for all 3 in the trilogy. So to say that this is the type of dream release myself and all other Sergio Leone fans have dreamed of is an understatement. No one before has put in this level of effort, and I can say right off the bat, you can pretty much get rid of all of your past video copies because they are completely obsolete. Of course, if you're a fan or if you're like me and you've been digging into the preservation history and trying to figure out this stuff yourself, as long as I have, then you're
probably going to have a bunch of nostalgia towards your entire shelf of dozens of Sergio Leone editions of all of his films, because they've all been a horrible mess on home video, not to mention their actual preservation history in terms of the films themselves. But for everyone going into this, you can safely upgrade to the Arrow release and basically get rid of everything else. The difference in terms of quality and work put in and sheer amounts of effort, and also eradicating past issues of video releases, is such that it really wipes the floor with everything we've gotten in the past. So to briefly talk about the film after revisiting it on the new Arrow presentation, it is remarkable just how well the film holds up and how much of a lightning in a bottle quality it has for being Sergio Leone's second major feature as a director after The Colossus of Rhodes, and how all of the Leoneisms and his style was already there, fully present and fully formed for the most part in A Fistful of Dollars. It, of course, is the lowest budgeted of the three films and has very meager production qualities, and had such a troubled production in terms of the producers nickel and diming everyone, and the production shutting down multiple times, and the production having to cut corners in all kinds of different ways to even get the film made, that, obviously some of that shows, but it actually manages to feed into the atmosphere because the film is so beautifully directed and so beautifully designed as a complete experience, from Leone's visual sense, his direction, Massimo Dallamano's incredible Technoscope photography, Carlos Simi's brilliant production design, which makes the film feel like a real world you have stepped into, and of course Ennio Morricone's iconic score. And all of these collaborations lay the groundwork for the next film, For a Few Dollars More, and of course where Leone would go after this. So this is really a new starting off point for Leone getting to do what he wanted to do instead of operating within a popular Italian genre film in Colossus of Rhodes. The film is a remake of Yojimbo. That was the original conception and intention, but given that the production was very low budget and had producers who were not willing to really want to deal with perhaps licensing the rights to remake Yojimbo, that led to a great deal of legal troubles after the film came out and was successful in Italy, and of course led to it being delayed for its release in the United States. The film is certainly a remake of Kurosawa's film, but of course the general story idea can be traced back at least to Dashiell Hammett's Red Harvest, but it must be stressed that A Fistful of Dollars is its own film in terms of tone and spirit, so much so that it immediately distances itself from being a remake. The films do share the same story and the same story setup and the same figures in terms of the lone stranger wandering into a town with two rival gang factions who are essentially pitted at each other's throats, and thus the town and everyone suffers, and the amount of corpses just piles up on all sides. But again, it's the spirit, the lifeblood of the film is entirely different. The sensibility is entirely different. And it's staggering every time you revisit the film just how assured it is, just how complete it feels, and also that it has a greater degree of cynicism to it that is perfect for 1964, and of course perfect to entertain Italian audiences of the time. It is very much drawing from the overall theme that Leone would return to time and time again, and what makes his Westerns unique, that he is in love with the mythology of the Western, but he doesn't quite believe in it. There's a cynicism there that yes, things could all be nice like they are in John Ford's films, but that's not how it was in reality. And the films, like Leone himself, have a natural sort of distancing from the traditional Western mythology. So they have a certain timeless cynicism that makes them much more approachable to modern audiences. And in fact, the Dollars trilogy is a great gateway in getting people more interested in the Western genre by seeing this particular deconstruction of Western myths and mixed with a more modern cynicism and a flippancy in terms of not just the humor, but also the casual violence, which also is extraordinarily stylized and reaches operatic heights. It's of course amazing to think think that no one thought very much of this film, and it is iconic from its very first frames. You have, of course, Ennio Morricone's fantastic title music in the wonderful title sequence designed by Leone, and then you have Clint Eastwood make his first appearance, practically wordless, as the man with no name, as United Artists would call him, but of course in the film he's actually referred to as Joe. But this really is the film that first establishes the Clint Eastwood persona, and like the film itself, and like Leone as a director, it's astonishing to see how all of this stuff was there and in full force, just perhaps not as refined as it was going to be over the next two films. So this has all of the promise of what's to come, and has that remarkable sort of first film ragtag energy to it, in terms of, yes, they didn't have much money. Yes, there was so little money that multiple times the production shut down and everybody threatened to walk off, and they had so little money that they couldn't afford to hire extras, that they had to rely more on day for night photography in a number of sequences, that they couldn't do all of the things that would have been done, obviously, on the next film when they had a lot more money and a much more stable producer. So it never ceases to amaze me when I come back to the film just how magical an experience it is, because it really shouldn't be. It shouldn't be as astonishing an experience as it is. I think it's all a testament to Leone and everyone involved, just how good they really were, and just this was essentially their shot. And so A Fistful of Dollars has this particular energy that the other two films in the Dollars trilogy don't have, because it's the first film, because it has so little money. It's a film that's having to prove itself. It's a film that is a little bit colder in its storytelling, a little bit more simplistic, but that's really by design. It's a brilliant idea to transpose the Yojimbo story into a Western, because it very much lends itself to that. And what Leone adds to the story in terms of themes more befitting an Italian audience, a more modern degree of cynicism, and a great lifelong love and adoration of the Western genre, those are the elements that mix here for the first time. And so the promise that he displayed in The Colossus of Rhodes, which is a very underrated film, is really here in full force on A Fistful of Dollars. This is the film that he had in him, essentially. And in spite of everything, he delivered, and delivered in spades, and while it took a while to get to the US, this is really where the Western genre changed overnight. And of course, this film became so successful that it sparked off the Italian Western boom. It was by no means the first Italian or European Western, but this was the one that was so strikingly unique and original in its tone, in its style, and its impact, that it inspired everyone else to follow suit. It also made so much money that, of course, they were going to follow suit. And so there were hundreds of Italian Westerns made in the next few years before the sort of craze had died off, sometime in the 1970s. Everything in A Fistful of Dollars will be polished further and refined more in For a Few Dollars More, and then eventually in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. But all of the blending of operatic violence, of the build-ups, of the incredible tension, of the wonderful, flippant, sardonic humor, the love of the Western and Western mythology, all of these elements are right here. They're just going to be taken further and refined more, or tweaked a little bit to better suit the story that's being told. But never again would Leone make a film that had a narrative that was as focused as A Fistful of Dollars. So it's important to keep that in mind, and that's why this film has a particular identity compared to even the other two films in the Dollars trilogy. Each film of the trilogy has its own particular flavor, given that each one had a different production budget and schedule, but also each one had a different tone, and as they went along, they grew more and more epic in scale, and Leone would continue this, and each film that he would make up to Once Upon a Time in America would become bigger or more complex, or deal with more characters, characters, and then starting with the next film, he started to play around with one of his other favorite themes, which is playing around with the passage of time and utilizing flashbacks and how that influences the various characters. So never again would there be a film that was as tightly focused as A Fistful of Dollars. So that's why it still remains iconic and retains its unique flavor among his body of work. Now, in my best bad impression of Gianmaria Volonte, let me just call from my booklet instead of my Winchester.
Rubio!
So to talk about the restoration, I would like to read the actual official page from the book about the process. A Fistful of Dollars has been exclusively restored by Arrow Films and is presented in its original aspect ratio of 2.35 to 1. The soundtrack is presented in restored original Italian and English mono, as well as remixed Italian and English 5.1 audio. The original 35mm 2-perf Technoscope camera negative was scanned and restored in 4K 16-bit resolution at La MGM-Ritrovata. The film was further restored and color graded in SDR, HDR10, and Dolby Vision at Silver Salt Restoration London. The original Italian film and audio materials sourced for this new restoration were made available from Unidis Jolly Film SRL. Materials were delivered by the Cineteca de Bologna and La MGM-Ritrovata. Additional English picture and audio materials were made available from Amazon MGM Studios. A 35mm Ambition Technicolor dye transfer print was sourced from the Cinema Museum London for color reference. Principal audio restoration on the original monotracks was completed by Bad Princess Productions. Additional 5.1 audio restoration work was completed by Thorstein Gislason. The original Italian trailer was restored in 4K with HDR10 grading at Restore Studios, with Dolby Vision grading completed at Fidelity and Motion. The outtakes were sourced from Unidis Jolly Film, SRL, and scanned in 2K resolution at La MGM-Ritrovata. So what all of that means is that Arrow has undertaken brand new restoration work for this film and the other two in the trilogy. For A Fistful of Dollars, they went back to the raw, high-resolution scans of the original negative that Ritrovata had done. This is the same scan that was used for the past two Kino Lorber releases, both on Blu-ray and UHD. Now, originally, the finished Ritrovata master was issued on that Kino Lorber Blu-ray and featured the woefully revisionist color timing that favored greens and browns, among other tones that were never part of the original film. The Kino Lorber UHD was a revisit that attempted to address some of these color issues by going back to an earlier version of the master files and performing the work there, but the overall result was not very successful in being able to eradicate all of the revisionist color timing. It was also only completed in SDR, which is why that disc was an SDR UHD. It was an improvement over the first go-round with the Ritrovata Master, but it really required going back to the raw scans and recolor grading from scratch. That's what Arrow has done, and they've also gotten original non-fading dye transfer Technicolor prints for reference from original releases. So this is really the work that should have been done in the first place in terms of properly color grading the Ritrovata scan. So that, of course, means that it is the same scan source that was used on the Kino Lorber releases. And that has led some reviews to say that the new Arrow release is perhaps not that much different from the Kino release, since it's using the same scan source. But that's really inaccurate, because the Kino releases were using first a completed Ritrovata Master and then a regraded version of the Ritrovata Master, whereas the Arrow release went back to the raw scan itself and did all the work from scratch from there. And the quality difference in both picture and sound, even though it's technically still coming from the same scan, is so vast compared to both iterations of the Kino releases that you can absolutely chuck those and never look at them again. So now to discuss the picture quality and what you're going to be experiencing on this release. Whether you've got the SDR Blu-ray or you've got the UHD, which has SDR, HDR10, and Dolby Vision HDR. Right off the bat, if you're coming from the Kino Lorber SDR UHD, the image in terms of the scan itself will, of course, appear somewhat similar, but the visual fidelity is a massive upgrade. The encoding is far superior, and the encoding of the feature is basically in the high 80s to mid 90s in terms of megabits per second throughout the entire feature, and the disc was encoded by Fidelity and Motion, so it really is as good as it it can be. Not to mention, almost all of the extras are on the second disc, so they're not taking up space on the feature UHD. This also does not feature the heavy cropping of the Kino Lorber releases, which seem to try and mimic the cropping on the old MGM Blu-ray and other MGM versions. And the MGM versions are not a proper reference because they never had the negative. They were merely using various prints and interpositives and newer interpositives that they generated because MGM never fully owned A Fistful of Dollars. They didn't have as much ownership rights as they did on the other two. So all old MGM releases were coming from a variety of sources that were multiple generations away from the original negative. So the MGM Blu-ray had a lot of cropping of the image, and then the Kino Lorber releases had a lot of cropping in the image. So you'll already see on the Arrow release a great deal of image has been restored and looks like the framing that we had on past releases of the older 2007 Italian restorations. So if you had the Ripley Home Video Italian Blu-ray or the German Blu-ray, which was basically a port of that, which had a couple slight differences, but it also had the more proper framing. So right away you'll notice that the Arrow release does not suffer from the image cropping that was found on the Kino releases. Then in addition to the much better encoding, you'll notice that the film grain looks far more natural and shows no major signs of grain management. It is a much more natural looking image, which also goes hand in hand with the much better encoding. Then this is enhanced further when you're looking at the UHD in terms of the HDR presentation, which is extraordinarily tasteful and has no signs of brightness issues, no major pop-out issues, no minor pop-out issues, actually. This is one of the handful of catalog films on UHD that even I am happy with in terms of the HDR presentation. There was never a shot or a moment that had any sort of brightness issues or any issues with certain objects of the frame, particularly the white adobe walls of some of the buildings in the San Miguel set. There was never an issue with the HDR, so this is extraordinarily tasteful, and if you have the ability to view the disc in Dolby Vision, it is even better than the HDR10, but the HDR10 is already extraordinarily well done. And then also when you look at the film in SDR, it looks fantastic. So no matter which format you're able to view, you're going to have a fantastic viewing experience. This has really been done, I think, as well as it could be. Now, is that to say that this is an absolutely perfect transfer or a perfect element that it's being sourced from? No, it obviously isn't. The film has had an incredible variety of preservation issues, and it was a very low-budgeted film in the first place. And since this is the same scan that was used for the masters that the Kino Lorber releases used, it does have a similar amount of the slight bits of damage that pops up occasionally. So you do need to expect that there is a little bit of spotting very infrequently. When it does happen, you will notice it because the overall image is so fantastic and already such a marked improvement over the Kino Lorber release that if you really didn't notice those issues before or not as much, they might be a little bit more noticeable here because the overall image fidelity is already so excellent that it makes the handful of moments where there is some inherent wear and some spotting and some debris or some slight hairs poking in or some scratching very slightly, it makes it a little bit more noticeable than it ever has been before. But a great deal of this is baked into the negative and the surviving elements and just goes back to the original production of the film. But they have been really addressed, I think, about as good as they can be, but do go in expecting that you're going to have some moments where there is a little bit of quality loss. There are a few shots that seem to be perhaps from a slightly lesser element, or they were just processed a little bit differently back in the day, or had been maybe replaced by some tiny bits of dupe material or something. So there are a couple moments where there is a little bit lesser quality, but those have always kind of existed, and of course were part of the Kino releases coming from the same general scan. But again, the overall quality improvement means that this may be a little bit more apparent than it was before, because this is really maximizing the full potential of this source as much as it possibly can. The only real drawback is a few extraordinarily fleeting moments of a very, very slight amount of what's almost a sort of stagnation in the film grain. This seems to be something that's part of the actual Ritrovata scan itself, as this is also in the Kino Lorber UHD, but like everything else I've described, it's not quite as noticeable there because the image fidelity is not as good as the Arrow version, and also the Arrow release went back to the raw scan materials, and the Kino versions were using some more finished versions of this same scan. So they are extraordinarily fleeting moments. They are very light, and I'd say 99% of people will probably not see them. But since I've seen this film on practically every release format it's had, I've seen it theatrically, I've seen prints of it, I've studied the Leone films far more than, admittedly, most people probably will. I did notice those, and those were part of the past Kino release, but they are extraordinarily fleeting, and there's really only maybe 3 of them, 3 or 4 at the most, and they are extraordinarily slight, mostly confined to the sort of opening act or opening reel or so of the film. That's really the only visual quirk that is, again, it's tied to the Ritrovata scan itself. There was nothing Arrow could do about it, and they are quite minor, so they are going to be things that are very fleeting, but if you're a videophile or you have a long history with these films, or if you notice those on the Kino release that came from a different version of this scan, then you're obviously going to see them crop up again here. And again, because the visual fidelity is so much greater than the Kino releases, it does make them a little bit more obvious because everything is so much clearer. But again, I just want to say those are very fleeting, very tiny moments that are the only sort of potential visual issue in an otherwise stupendous looking feature that does have some moments with some wear. Then you have to look at the color timing. And A Fistful of Dollars has had a variety of looks on home video. All the MGM releases in particular were quite cold, quite contrasty, didn't have a lot of color to them, and also had significant cropping. And that's all due to the fact that MGM wasn't using the original camera negative. They were using a variety of prints and interpositives they made to generate video releases. And a lot of times they would mix and match between those. So you have to keep in mind all the old releases of the film were coming from copies of copies that were many generations away. Then the Italian restoration in 2007 that turned up on the Italian and German Blu-rays and also had some really lovely prints made. Those had a much more saturated color palette, and on some of the video releases that could vary. Like the Italian and German Blu-rays, even though it was the same restoration master, they actually had different slight color casts to them. Some had even more saturated skin tones, for example, that started going more into an orangey red. Then, of course, the first Kino Lorber Blu-ray came from the defective Ritrovata master with the terrible color grading that went for a completely revisionist, inaccurate color presentation. Then came the much more refined and thankfully better Kino UHD attempt to try and address color issues, which did undo quite a bit of the damage that had been done, but of course couldn't undo everything and still had issues of its own. So Arrow coming into all of this and having to try and color grade the film and get it right was very difficult. And thankfully I can say that I think they just about nailed it. In terms of the color, this manages to have all of the positives of the 2007 Italian restoration without overdoing it on the skin tones, without getting too saturated, and also avoiding the problems of the finished versions of the Ritrovata master. The color is so far improved over both Kino iterations that it is such a relief to see the film with a really wonderful color grading. So I really think this manages to avoid all of the video color timing issues that the film has had across all formats and really strike a perfect balance. It's also really important to note that they were able to pull and reference original dye transfer Technicolor print materials and try their darndest to get this as accurate as they could to original prints that were well made and well preserved, that were, of course, Ambition dye transfer Technicolor, which are prints that do not fade. And when you only have limited materials in terms of what you have to reference, when you have great dye transfer prints, that's one of the best things you can use in trying to get a master as accurate to the original release appearance as you can. Another thing that I was really pleasantly surprised by is that all of the day for night sequences, which have been a big problem on a lot of past releases in terms of trying to get it right, are actually even better than they were on the Kino UHD. I thought that the day for night sequences on the Kino UHD presentation were actually an improvement over past releases. That was actually what I was most pleased with on the Kino UHD in terms of the visual appearance, that they managed to address some color issues and improve some of the shots in the day for night sequences. And given the limited nature of day for night and how it's extraordinarily difficult to approach that in the video realm and in film restoration to try and match and approximate what it would have been like on a release print in the 60s, I really didn't think there was much room for improvement. Well, guess what? There was. And with the addition of the very tasteful HDR, I think the day for night sequences here on the Arrow UHD look better than they ever have on home video and really help to sell those sequences better. The day for night is usually what most people point to as being very artificial looking, and most modern audiences are not used to day for night, and also day for night very frequently isn't captured right or isn't rendered properly on video releases because it's a very nuanced thing to try and time it to match how it would have been originally. And of course, not every day for night shot was done to the same quality standards. So the actual photography could vary wildly in terms of how well the photography matched the effect and how it was done photochemically and then how it appeared on release prints. So if you were curious, I think they even managed to improve the day for night sequences. Everything about the image on the Arrow presentation is really a quantum leap forward. That, of course, means the actual framing of the image not having major cropping issues. That means the color timing really finessing everything to be, I think, the best we've ever had on home video. I think the black levels are improved to a miraculous degree. We have a much more stable and nuanced present grain field throughout the film, in spite of the couple holdovers inherent from the Ritrovata scan itself and very tiny fleeting moments. Yes, there's still some inherent damage and wear that pops up every once in a while, but that is really tied to the elements themselves. And I really think that all of the extra elbow grease and manpower and hours of work that Arrow put into really trying to refine this Ritrovata source scan has managed to eke out every single possible bit of quality that they could. And so I think you can actually call this a restoration, whereas the past efforts that were labeled restorations really didn't put in this same degree of effort. And seeing Arrow come in and do this with the scans that already existed and doing the absolute best they could, that's what you wish had been done in the first place, and that's what frankly should have been done in the first place. Unfortunately, it took a couple years and several releases to get to this point where we were able to have another entity come in and put in this effort, but this is the effort the film needed. This is the effort all Leone films need because of their long-standing issues. So in a lot of ways, this is actually Arrow helping to undo a lot of baked-in problems that technically stretch back all the way to the film's original 1964 release. So in that sense, this release is not just a home video release. It's not just a refreshing of a Ritrovata scan. It's not just a release that's an upgrade over the Kino Lorber releases, but this is actually helping to undo over 60 years of preservation issues in its own unassuming way. It's being sold as a physical media release, and most people will come to this thinking that, oh, it's just a deluxe upgraded version of what we already have on the Kino Lorber release. But really, this is a restoration overhaul. And I don't apply the term restoration lightly. All three of these releases are the product of a great deal of work and effort. And what you see in the booklet about the restoration is really only the Cliff Notes version of all the effort from all the wonderful individuals involved. And I myself was privy to a little bit of information and was able to give my own input and 2 cents on a few things. But I was just a very small cog in the machinery, very much far removed after a great deal of work had already been done. But I basically had a slight window into seeing just how much effort had been put into this. So I want to stress to everyone who hasn't looked into the actual process behind these, or maybe was wondering how much work went into these, and especially everyone who's wondering, the question, especially because this is a UK exclusive and a release that you have to import here in the US, to everyone who's wondering, is this an improvement over the Kino Lorber releases or any past releases? Is this a release that I need to get? Yes. I mean, just put it that way. This makes all past releases of the film on home video obsolete. But there is an added bonus to the Arrow release, and that is the Italian version of the film. Now, of course, famously, these films, like all Italian films of the era, were shot without synchronized sound and were then dubbed into the language of the country they were being released in. This typically resulted in lip sync issues and making some films seem cheaper due to them not having synchronized sound. But Leone very meticulously designed his soundtracks in terms of layering every sound effect and working with Morricone's incredible music and, of course, the voices of the dub actors to make a complete sonic experience to match the incredibly powerful visuals. So the fact that we've never gotten to have the original Italian audio in terms of the original mono mix that Leone supervised and made on home video releases in terms of the American ones is a pretty major oversight. And so getting to have the Italian audio here, in spite of it obviously not having Clint Eastwood's famous dialogue, is a window into experiencing the film exactly as it would have played in 1964 in terms of Italian theaters, and getting to compare the audio mixes, in addition to having the Italian credit sequences as well. So this isn't just a matter of having two different mono mixes and having the original Italian mono finally and having a restoration of the English dub, but it also means having the Italian opening and closing titles, which are unique, and having proper subtitles. This isn't merely just using the English dub to do the English subtitles. These are all proper translated English subtitles from the Italian. A lot of it does match up with the English dub, but then there are frequently other lines that are different wordings, and there are even different character names for certain characters. So I would encourage all fans coming to this release, because we've not really had the opportunity to view a proper home video release with the Italian titles and Italian mono mix. I would encourage people to watch the Italian version as well to get that experience, because it is a real treat to be able to do that and get proper English subtitles. A brief note about the credits sequences. Of course, the film famously had Americanized names for all of the production crew. So, of course, Leone was credited as Bob Robertson, and the idea was that having these Americanized names would make it seem more like an American Western and make Italian audiences more willing to go buy tickets for it. Then, of course, when the film became a big hit, everybody wanted their names actually put on it. So here, as seen on the previous Kino releases, we have the restoration of the titles, and it's Leone's credit that is under his own name, but all the other credits remain with the Americanized names, which is typically how you see the title sequence. But when you switch over to the Italian version, it is the Italian titles, and all of them have the Americanized names. So you see Leone credited as Bob Robertson on the Italian version. Now we turn to the audio, which which is as major an improvement as the picture, and in a great number of ways is actually an even bigger improvement over the past Kino Lorber releases than the already outstanding picture upgrade is. So on this disc, you have 4 options. You have the original English and Italian mono tracks in 1.0, and then you have very tastefully done 5.1 upmixes of these new restored versions of the mono tracks. So they are the same audio in terms of the monos and the 5.1s. The 5.1s are merely tasteful upmixes of the mono tracks. Now, anyone who's seen one of my reviews knows that I am a film purist and have no use for audio remixes. But if you must insist on having Leone's meticulously designed mono tracks upmixed or in some sort of multi-channel configuration, what Arrow has nicely done for you is basically take the new restored mono tracks and bring them into a 5.1 container. Basically, these 5.1 mixes are mostly entirely front-locked. So you have the dialogue in the center, and then the front, left, and right main channels allow for ambiance and music to nicely spread across the front stage, so basically around the screen. There's basically little to no surround activity except for some extraordinarily slight moments along with the LFE to let certain bigger moments open up a little bit, but never taking the sound focus away from the front stage area. So this allows the original mono design to remain, and thus it's not hyper revisionist as pretty much every other Leone film remix is. But I would always encourage people to view the film with the original mono mixes because they are brilliantly done, they were meticulously designed, and even though the Arrow 5.1 upmixes are very tastefully done and just upmixing those restored mono tracks, you do lose some detail, you do lose some clarity, and they are not the same. So really, I would say only use the 5.1 remixes if you absolutely insist on having to have a multi-channel experience. And if that is how you view catalog films, there is thankfully, for the first time, a very tasteful, archivally minded 5.1 upmix of the original mono for both the English and Italian options. And they are the same tracks, just being tastefully brought into a 5.1 environment to give you that experience while not changing anything, which is unfortunately what was found on the past remixes on all home video releases that featured a remix going back to the MGM DVDs. So the real focus is on the mono mixes because these restorations and presentations are the source of the 5.1 upmixes anyway. And this is where my involvement really comes into play on this release, because what Arrow was able to do on this release is actually get brand new transfers of the soundtrack masters themselves, which is really the first time anybody has done that. And it means that we don't have to live with the terrible botched restoration attempt of the English mono mix that was done by Ritrovata and others, I think back in around 2014, and then that was utilized for both Kino Lorber releases. That was the mix that I talked about in my review of the Kino release that drives me crazy because they did seemingly new transfers of the original stems and didn't pay attention to the balance between dialogue, music, and effects, so the music overpowered everything, frequently drowned out effects and dialogue, and significant portions of dialogue and effects were actually missing from that mix. So it was horribly revisionist, although it had some really fantastic quality to it in terms of the audio presentation. It was not the original mono mix, and it had defects, and it was missing material, and it was just completely botched and should have never been released. It was so bad. Thankfully, that terrible botched restoration attempt in terms of the English mono mix has now been thrown to the trash bin where it should have been. Here on the Arrow release, we have a brand new transfer of the English dub source, so for the first time, we don't have any major generational loss, which results in a really impressive quality boost over all past releases. The only issue really was that, for whatever reason, it was actually missing the famous Morricone title music. And so what you're actually hearing on this release and why it sounds as good as it does is from an actual video release of the past, and that is actually right here. So this is the Pan and Scan MGM-UA or CBS Fox 1985 Laserdisc release of the film, which has an analog mono track. This is, of course, not the way you want to experience the film, and it was made from seemingly mixing and matching some different print sources. It is a raw as-is transfer with a lot of damage. It's also missing a little bit of footage here and there, and also reverts to Italian for the very end. So it's a bit of a mess, but it's the most raw, hands-off transfer you can get of the film, and had already been released to VHS a year prior in 1984, which I have here. And also, Laserdisc analog as a format in terms of sound fidelity is not as good as VHS hi-fi. But when I did my audio research digging into every release of the film I could get, I found that the best fidelity was actually on the compromised Pan and Scan Laserdisc analog presentation. So when I was able to give my input to the Arrow team and share my bits of research and things, basically we found that my own research was right, and the best sounding version of the famous title sequence with Ennio Morricone's famous title theme was here on the 1985 Laserdisc analog track. The only issue is because this was a raw as-is transfer of an element that had quite a lot of issues and quite a lot of wear, this had quite a lot of high-end distortion on it, and so it's not what you would obviously want to have to use in a restoration, but it had greater fidelity than anything else, and still does compared to all the other releases. So what Arrow was able to do is actually do quite a bit of cleanup on this and manage to tame quite a bit of that high-end distortion. It's obviously not as raw as it is here on the Laserdisc, but that's why you have the title sequence with such amazing audio quality and preserving the original mono mix of the film in terms of having all of the sound effects, the horse hoofbeats, the whip cracks, the gunshots, all of that is exactly as it's supposed to be. And so you don't have any of the problems of the botched previous restoration mono attempt, nor do you have the versions of the title sequence on past releases that sounded very muffled or sounded like they were coming from another source, or the versions on the MGM releases that were not using any form of original negative material. So if you're wondering what you're hearing on the Arrow restoration when you're viewing the iconic title sequence, you're actually hearing a cleaned up version of the audio taken from this very 1985 Pan and Scan Laserdisc analog track. It's crazy to think that this is what everybody had to go to, but it just goes to show how varied the element and transfer history is of these films. Then at the end of the title sequence, we transition seamlessly into the new transfer of the English dub soundtrack master. Again, I have to stress that this is the first time the master materials have been sourced for a home video release or a restoration. So there is a remarkable difference in terms of quality when you compare it to every other past version. And the last release that had a good sounding version of the English mono was all the way back on the original MGM DVD from 1999. So we've needed this for a long while. I do have one quibble about the audio, and I'm not sure where this may have been introduced because Arrow did get these transfers from Ritrovata for the audio because the materials are obviously in Italy. But there is a slight degree of noise reduction that is present here on the mono track. It's not heavy-handed or anything, and it doesn't detract from the wonderful clarity improvement from not having any generational loss in the audio. But basically, when you compare it to the best sounding past release of the mono, which is still unfortunately the 1985 Laserdisc analog, which is again a raw transfer of a mixture of prints, so it's full of hiss and ticks and pops and damage and all kinds of things, and of course is not a complete track because it's not a complete version of the film. When you compare those two, you can get the sense that obviously there has been some noise reduction that's been applied. It's not extremely heavy-handed, and it is something that's typically done in the modern age in terms of audio tracks on catalog films. I wish it hadn't been done, and I wish that there had been a purist option if that was possible. But again, I'm not entirely sure if that was something that was done by Ritrovata or introduced at some point earlier. It's, again, not something most people are really going to notice, but given that I've already done a lot of research into the film's audio, you can kind of tell that's a little bit of a factor. It's, again, not heavy-handed. There's not a ton of examples of the sort of effect where you have the noise floor and hiss sort of switching on and off between dialogue, where it's only audible when people are speaking, and then when they stop speaking, it goes ultra quiet because it's been sort of muted, and you have that sort of unfortunate switching on and off effect of the actual noise floor. But it's something that is unfortunately here. I think it's probably tied to the Ritrovata master itself, like the extraordinarily tiny fleeting moments of slight grain stagnation. So I don't think it's anything Arrow did. It's just the one thing in the audio that gives me pause, and I wish wasn't there, and I wish there was a secondary track that was just completely raw. But again, it's not something most people are going to notice or get into, but I did want to mention that. I don't want this to detract, though, from how much of a quality difference you're going to experience with this, because, again, this is the first time we have the English mono without any major generational loss. So if you have any video release of the film since at least the year 2000, you're going to notice a major difference in terms of the clarity of the English mono dub, but also you're not going to have any of the terrible problems of the botched last restoration attempt. So this is extraordinarily great for what it is. The only thing is I just wish it didn't have that little bit of noise reduction. That's the one thing that just makes me go, oh, I wish that wasn't there. It's, again, not something people are probably going to notice all that much, but it is a factor there, so I do have to mention it. But again, I think that was probably tied to the source that they were given from Ritrovata. In terms of the Italian mono, it is a relatively high quality source that Arrow has done the best that they could with. They have performed additional restoration work on it. The only issue is, unfortunately, the Italian mono is much more muffled compared to the English mono. I'm not exactly sure what source they had to work with in terms of the transfer that they were given, but you will notice that the quality is inherently less than the English dub, but it is of sufficient quality to still be an enjoyable experience. And the real key of the Italian mono is to, of course, experience the film in its original Italian audio with the Italian voice cast, but also to experience and study all the little intricate differences in the sound effects, because compared to the English dub, there's, of course, some generational difference, but some of the dialogue and effects are slightly different here and there. So if you're like me and you've seen the film a million times, but always with the English dub, it's a remarkable experience to finally be able to look at the film with a restored, solid version of the Italian mono to examine and find those little minute differences in terms of the balance levels between dialogue, music, and effects that might be just a little bit different here and there. And of course, get to experience the Italian voice cast and how the different voices add some different inflections to some of the characters, and how some of the scenes play just a little bit differently in Italian with obviously the English subtitles translating to give just a slight different spin or edge on certain things. So that's why I wanted to highlight also the importance of having the Italian audio, well, really the Italian version of the film, because you also have the Italian credits. It wasn't just Arrow working on and including the Italian mono. They went the extra mile of also including the Italian credits. And so on the disc, when you are at the menu, you actually go to play film and then are given the option of the English or Italian versions. And that's how you select between the two. So it is a distinct separate version because we do have the full Italian titles. Now to move on to the packaging and artwork of this release. This is, of course, the limited edition. It is a UK exclusive and is being done in the current Arrow style of having the deluxe hard case with the slipcover over it. The artwork is by the great Tony Stella and is the first of 3 matching red and black sort of tinged pieces that will be used for each of the films, and so they'll all go together on the display shelf. You also have matching spines that will go together and has the unique signature aesthetics of the films. The rear has the usual Arrow Arrow design in terms of listing the new transfer information and the substantial amount of supplements spread across the 2 discs. And as you can see, they took the time to nicely recreate the font of the series for the disc headings. So of course, remove the slipcover to reveal the same beautiful art underneath, but on the hard case, there's more of a sort of flat finish, which is also nicely textured on the case, as we've seen on all the other modern Arrow releases that are opting for the slipcover over hard case style. And here on the case, for those who get bugged by the UK rating logos that are printed on, of course, you don't have to deal with those on the case itself. There's also a beautiful wraparound effect as Tony Stella's gorgeous art continues. So it's not just the beautiful cover, it's actually got a nice wraparound effect. But there's, of course, more beautiful, unique art, because the case has more beautiful Tony Stella art, but it's also completely unique. Also beautifully rendered from the film, but keeping the same beautiful design aesthetic. And the other 2 films have similar case art that matches this one, so even the cases are uniform. In another beautiful touch, they've even included the Italian title on the artwork, which is something I didn't expect and really made me smile. They have a beautiful, unique spine with the original font for the title, and then the same rear cover information, but now rendered in white. And Arrow, as usual, includes reversible art with an original poster. This, of course, featuring the iconic 1967 United Artists American poster advertising The Man with No Name. Similar spine and similar rear cover. Inside the case, there's a little Arrow insert card, which has an ad for Demolition Man. And then we have the discs themselves. There's the UHD, which has the commentaries and then the trailers and radio spots. And then disc 2 is a Blu-ray disc, which is Region B locked, so you will need to have region-free capability to view the Blu-ray of supplements. This contains all of the previous legacy supplements from past releases, and of course the new Arrow Video supplements. So the only supplements on the feature disc are the trailers and radio spots, and then the audio commentaries. Inside we also find the limited edition book, which has the same beautiful Tony Stella art from the case itself. This done in the usual Arrow style with a nice hard binding. It nicely uses the United Artists taglines from the marketing campaign in 1967 on the back. The book runs about 60 pages and features 4 brand new fantastic essay pieces. And the opening features the main art from the iconic United Artists poster. And in a really nice touch that's going to be, I think, replicated on the other 2, the back features the original key art that was designed and used on the MGM video releases in the late 80s, early 90s. So, of course, you've got the full art image there. It's, of course, from the 1988 VHS tape, and, of course, from the Laserdisc rendering as well. So that's a really nice touch of preserving another aspect of the film's history and something that I didn't expect. So I was flipping through this. I was like, oh my gosh, they actually sourced the MGM video art and got the full key art as well. So that's a really nice touch. And again, I think they may be doing that on the other 2 films' books as well. Another aspect of the book that's really important that I was so pleased to see is that, of course, we have the cast and crew listing, but Arrow has taken the time to also list all the performers who went uncredited, which has been a great source of discussion in the fan community all these decades of trying to discuss all members of the cast and crew who weren't necessarily always credited on a 1960s Italian film. So here's the listing for the crew and then the uncredited crew members. And then if that wasn't enough, they've also given us the information and listing for everyone involved in the English dub and when it was done. This is another really fantastic addition because even I myself have tried to find out some of this information, and fans have gone back and forth trying to figure out who dubbed which part and trying to identify each voice. And without the actual original production information, it's impossible to know 100% for sure. So this is something that people may just flip through in the book and say, oh, it's just the cast and crew listing. But Arrow has actually taken the time to document all of the uncredited performers, the uncredited crew members, and give us the entire voice cast of the original English dub and the recording date in 1965. So this was, of course, done long before the film was ever actually released in the US. As usual, there's beautiful double-page image spreads as well. Again, the book is about 60 pages and features 4 fantastic new essays and is just as good as you would expect from an Arrow limited edition book. And then we have the About the Presentation page, which gives the credits for the restoration work and the bit of details that I read before. But again, this is basically the Cliff Notes version. The workflow was this and a whole lot more that it can't all be contained in a single page. In fact, the work that went into these is so detailed that I really wish there was a whole second book detailing the whole process of trying to get this as right as humanly possible. And again, I only had a small window of knowledge and connection to some of this as, again, a very small cog in this great amount of machinery in terms of everybody else's efforts and such. But I know just how much work had to go into this to get to this point. So again, I want to stress that what you see in the book is only a Cliff Notes version of all the work that went into all 3 films on these releases. And then, not to toot my own horn, but if you look at the credits and special thanks, I actually made it into a booklet. It's still really weird to hold this in my hands and see my name under the thanks. So if you wondered why my name popped up in here, it's because of helping out with the title sequence audio and being able to give some advice and my own 2 cents on a couple different things. So again, my own participation was extraordinarily limited. I am just a very, very, very extremely tiny part of this overall process, but I feel wonderful that I was able to at least contribute in some small way to a film I have been researching and trying and hoping to see properly preserved for over 20 years now. I've been doing this since I was, really before I was even fully a teenager. So this has been a long time coming, and it's just still really weird to see my name in a booklet and know I was at least able to help in some small way to preserve one of the most important films in my life. And then, of course, we also have a beautiful fold-out poster. This has the new Tony Stella artwork. This is the piece that's used on the case and the booklet, and it looks gorgeous, expanded to a fold-out poster form. The reverse is, of course, a reprinting of the iconic 1967 United Artists release poster with The Man with No Name. And it's nicely done, so each one is a nice frameable piece that you can put on display and show your Leone fandom off. Now we turn to the Exhaustive Supplemental Features package on A Fistful of Dollars here on the Arrow release. Disc 1, whether you have the UHD or Blu-ray version, includes both pre-existing audio commentaries from past releases. So you get the outstanding must-listen commentary tracks, the first by Sir Christopher Frayling, who is Leone's biographer and has been a lifelong champion of Leone as one of the great cinematic artists. This was originally recorded for the MGM DVD releases, and it's been nicely ported here. You also have the outstanding commentary by Tim Lucas that was commissioned and placed on the Kino Lorber releases. So it is a plethora of information to be derived from both of these commentaries. If you've not listened to them before, each one is a blast to listen to, easily digestible in terms of the information being presented, and both exhaustively well researched, but done still in a wonderful conversational manner so they never get dry or boring. And it's fantastic that Arrow was able to license and include both of them because they're both essential and both among the best commentaries you can possibly listen to. Also on the disc is the vintage, original, and reissue advertising materials in terms of trailers, radio spots, spots and TV advertisements. The main draw here is that the Italian trailer has been restored and is in the full scope resolution, but on the UHD, it's a 4K restored version that also has Dolby Vision HDR. This also nicely has English subtitles that appear, but this is really incredible to be able to see. Plus, it's a nice raw as-is presentation with some restoration work that shows really nice natural color grading that also resembles what you see in the feature transfer. This is a real treasure to be able to see this, as there's one or two brief flashes of some frames and shots that aren't in the film, or a shot that runs a little bit longer, and it's fascinating to see how it was sold to Italian audiences. This is the only one of the trailers that's a 4K presentation, but it's really fantastic that this additional restoration effort was put into this, and on the UHD it's been given Dolby Vision treatment as well. We have a 1080p presentation of the original German trailer, which is also in scope. This has a great deal of wear, so it's obviously in much worse condition than the Italian trailer, but it's still a great treasure to have here on this disc, to see the German advertising and marketing campaign and to see the original German trailer in this level of quality, which we have not had before. Then we have some really fascinating and very striking German re-release trailers that are done in a very odd style that's extraordinarily striking, because it's almost trying to go for more of a music video approach and not really focusing on having dialogue. This is really making the films as iconic as they are condensed down into a hyper trailer version. We have at least two of these here, and overall it runs about 4.5 minutes. It's another 1080p presentation, and this from the wonderful Eldorado Productions. So we have these courtesy of the great fan slash historian slash preservationist slash documentarian Mike Siegel, who is no stranger to Western classics being released on physical media, such as his work, of course, most famously on Sam Peckinpah's films. We have the UK release trailer, which is in about a 1.66 to 1 ratio. It seems like an older transfer file or something. It is a bit noisy, but at least we do have a representation of how the film was sold originally in the British market in the 1960s. We have the United Artists American release trailer, which is in scope and is of solid quality. It looks similar to how it's looked on past Blu-ray releases, so it seems like that's been essentially sort of recycled here, but at least we have the United Artists presentation of its trailer and its marketing campaign preserved. Then we have the fantastic double bill reissue trailer that United Artists did for A Fistful of Dollars and For a Few Dollars More. Beautiful, iconic, stirring marketing campaign materials. It is in a 1.78 ratio and does seem to be an older standard definition file, as it's basically just using what was generated for the MGM DVDs. The source is pretty worn and has emulsion scratches and things, but it's just fantastic to have this on the disc preserved, as it's a beautiful reissue marketing campaign. They also have included the television spots done for this wonderful double bill reissue, which are basically a shortened hyper version of the wonderful reissue trailer in little, 20 and 30 second spots. These also are faded with heavy wear. They're also the older standard def file being upscaled, and they're of course in 1.33 as their TV spots, but still it's great to have these preserved here as well. Then there are radio spots from the original United Artists release in 1967 and radio spots for the double bill reissue. And if you're like me, radio spots are wonderful to study because they're basically the audio-only shorter, extremely hyped up version of the wonderful marketing campaigns already seen in the trailers. And radio spots are a lot harder to come by, as they really didn't survive as well as trailers did, and trailers themselves didn't survive very well. So getting any surviving radio spots and getting them also included is fantastic. But we have both the 1967 UA radio spots and then some from the reissue. All the other extras are on the second Blu-ray disc on each set, whether you've got the Blu-ray set or the UHD set. Again, the second disc with all the supplements is Region B locked, so if you're here in the States and you don't have the ability to play Region B discs, you will have to get a region-free player or find some other option to view all of this because it is Region B locked. So the disc starts with the new Arrow-produced features for this release. So the first is When It All Started, an interview with critic and historian Fabio Melelli, which I think is going to be like the first part of what will be matching supplements on the other two. This is a really nice overview of the film's production, the Yojimbo connection, and the legal battle that erupted after the film became successful, the struggle to get the film made, the difficulties in the lower budgeted production, the overall impact of the film, its effect on Leone and Eastwood's careers, but also the careers of others involved in the film, and where everybody went afterwards. This is really wonderful to give viewers, especially newcomers, more of the overall history of the film, but also talking about the themes of the film and its overall legacy. It runs only about 14 minutes, but it's really all-encompassing and is a very nicely done featurette. Of course, since the speaker is Italian, it is Italian audio with English subtitles, but they are very well done, and all of the subtitled extras on this release are so outstanding that you don't notice the fact that you're watching an extra that is subtitled in English. The next piece is entitled Four Fingers, Four Picks, which runs about 15 or so minutes. This is a new interview with guitarist Bruno Diamario, the guitarist who, of course, performed for Morricone and had a long history of performing on Morricone scores. This is a fantastic interview. Diamario is so full of life when he's talking. His eyes have a sparkle, and he obviously enjoys talking about his work, and he talks about his life experiences and how he got into performing and playing professionally, how he met Ennio Morricone and became friends with him for so long, and how he came to essentially perform on the source recording that then inspired and led to laying the groundwork and then being redone for the main theme of A Fistful of Dollars, and then, of course, working on the score itself. So this is a fantastic interview. Again, it feels like the time flies by because he's so full of life and energetic, which is really amazing because you can clearly see that he is having to use an oxygen tube as he is obviously, getting on up there in years. But that doesn't slow him down at all. He's so wonderfully charming that you feel like you're just sitting there in the room for this interview, and he's such a wonderful character that you find yourself smiling throughout the whole piece. So this is a wonderful featurette. It's so good and such a wonderful interview that, like the other interviews, it goes beyond being just a mere interview. The next piece is Wind and Fire, which runs about 17 minutes. This is a new interview with Alessandro De Rosa, who was Morricone's biographer. So this is someone who had a rather deep friendship and connection with Morricone as he wrote his biography with Morricone's collaboration, but also somebody who's able to get into the minutiae and nuance of Morricone's style, and specifically about the A Fistful of Dollars score, how it developed, how the title theme developed, and how it laid the groundwork for his further collaborations with Leone in the films to come. This is a wonderful interview. Again, the subject is really charming and spirited, and the conversation just flies by, and it's jam-packed with wonderful information, but also great personal insight about Morricone himself. So this goes far beyond just being another wonderful critic interview where you've just got somebody talking about historical events and such. This is somebody who actually knew and had a good relationship with the subject. So you get not only the wonderful critical analysis, but you get wonderful personal insight as well. The next piece is entitled A Night at the Movies, which runs about 12 and a half minutes. This is with filmmaker Paolo Bianchini, who was actually a friend of Leone's and was in some ways taken under Leone's wing after being a younger fellow who wanted to get into the film industry and becoming friends with Sergio Leone before the making of A Fistful of Dollars, before Leone was a huge name in the Italian film industry. And so he was there for the moments when Leone actually saw Yojimbo in a theater and got the idea and thought it would make a wonderful Western. But he's also able to give personal insight about Leone and about being friendly with Leone before he was super famous, and then after that sort of explosion of fame and after his career grew to greater heights, and that he was still the same very gregarious, charming person after the fame and success as he had been before. So it's a wonderful interview about getting more insight into the development of A Fistful of Dollars, also discussing some of what it was like when the Yojimbo court case started, but also getting more of that direct firsthand personal experience recounting just what Leone was like as a person and as a director, from somebody who was essentially taken under his wing and allowed to see into his working process. So this is more priceless material. Then we get the piece that's entitled A Fistful of Outtakes. This is just over 36 minutes. And what this is a beautifully edited compilation of outtakes from A Fistful of Dollars, which is compiled out of what the credits say is over 6 hours of bits of film that are in the Italian archives. This is an absolute treasure trove for all Leone fans, all fans of this film, because you're able to see raw takes and raw elements from the slate boards to bits of outtakes, of course, also flubs and screw-ups. Of course, given that this is an Italian film, all of this is silent. It's merely the footage, and it's beautifully edited by Jordan Krug and Henry Blythe over cues from Morricone's score to actually follow the rough continuity of the film. So it follows in sequence. So it's been edited together to run in sequence with the film and the score. But if you were wondering what sort of treasures are in this, this opens with the discarded original opening of the film of the man with no name actually stealing his poncho, which was the original concept of showing this sort of semi-comic scene of a wandering Confederate soldier or someone dressed in Confederate gear from the Civil War riding on a mule and basically stealing a poncho and materials from somebody at the riverbank, getting the best of them before then riding into the film. So this was the original concept that we've only been able to sort of read about, and we know that Leone dropped this idea to make the Magnificent Stranger seem more mysterious, but to actually get some visual of that here and see the poncho actually being obtained and know that this was actually shot is mind-blowing. And on top of that, when you see the slate boards throughout this entire extra, all of these are featuring the original working title of the film, which was, of course, not A Fistful of Dollars, nor the Italian version, but we actually see the original working title of The Magnificent Stranger. So that, again, gives you this incredible time capsule glimpse into the actual production when nobody really thought this was going to add up to all that much. The quality is really quite fantastic for what this is. It's presented in 1080p HD. It's in scope. The clarity is actually quite good for most of the footage. Some is obviously much more worn, some has color fading, but overall, it's a very lovely, as-is natural-looking presentation, which seems to indicate just how good the color grading on Arrow's restoration on the actual feature is. So if you look at the UHD or Blu-ray of the film, and then compare that with the compilation of the raw outtakes as seen here, you'll see a really nice visual continuity, even though there's obviously varying levels of quality in the footage and it's worn and some of it's faded and such. It does seem to indicate just how nuanced and good the Arrow color timing on the feature itself is. So of course you do watch through this and you are watching to get all the glimpses of Clint Eastwood and the cast cracking up, or some of the fast draws not working, or having flubs and things, but also getting a further glimpse into the production of the film, the setting of the shots, and seeing that some angles were originally different, so they tried some things and then they would try it another way. We also have a number of the day for night shots being set up, and there are even some slates showing the tests being done for the day for night sequences before they were actually done. So that's another nice view into how the day for night was done in the first place. Again, this is all priceless material. It is beautifully edited together, and knowing that it's compiled from over 6 hours of material, I just wonder what else is in the vaults. I'm sure they were able to get together all of the best and most relevant material, and again, it's beautifully edited into film sequence, so it's like a miniature alternate version of seeing the movie being made. But I certainly hope someday that the 6+ hours of raw materials somehow is able to be seen. But this in and of itself is worth purchasing the entire disc for, because this is such a priceless treasure. I mean, again, it opens with the original conceived opening of the film, which is the stealing of the poncho, which was eventually retrofitted onto The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, which is why that film is often viewed as a prequel, because the Clint Eastwood character does not get his iconic poncho until the end of the film. Well, here you get to see the original version of that idea, which was supposed to open the film. So we have an actual visual representation of the long-rumored original opening of the film, which nobody was ever sure if it was actually shot or not. The next supplement is The Day the Soundtrack Changed, which is a 22-minute video essay by Lovely John about the Morricone soundtrack in particular. He doesn't just do musical analysis of the score, but he also talks about the various releases and the overall release history of the score, and of course the soundtrack versions being different from the film, and the development of the title theme. So this is really nicely done, and also filled with all kinds of images of Morricone and the various soundtrack releases. All the other video extras are legacy pieces that were on past releases, and the Arrow set is basically able to replicate everything from the MGM and Kino Lorber releases, so you don't have to hang on to those for any of the video extras. So the first is entitled Mirasol, or Sergio Leone's Madonna. This is an interview with Mariana Koch done by Mike Siegel, I think in about 2017 or so, and was presented on the Kino Lorber releases in the past. This runs about 32 minutes and is another of these fantastic interviews that Mike Siegel has done and put together into these wonderful home video supplements, where he has this great ability to get the subject to open up and really reflect in a genuine manner about the production of the film and their experiences. So Coach is able to talk about her initial reluctance to do the film and why she finally agreed to do it, the overall experience of working on such a low-budget Italian Western at this point in time, the experience of working with Sergio Leone and how warm and affectionate he was towards her, and how they developed a certain friendship that continued on after the film. And she even talks about how they met years later and how he was overjoyed to see her after all that time. She talks about how she eventually left the film industry and went into medicine. But it's just a beautiful interview that makes you feel, again, like you're sitting in the room. And she talks at length, but it never feels like it's stretching on. It feels like it could go for 2 hours and you wouldn't notice it. Again, I have to say just how impressive Mike Siegel's pieces always are. Even when it's just what would simply be termed an interview, it's much more than that, because he uses elements of his vast archive of vintage stills and images and materials to make the experience of watching this all the better. The only quirk or issue is, of course, that this was done years ago, so when there are clips of the film, it's from the older master used on the Kino release with the defective mono track restoration, so that's to be expected. So when you watch this, you will be given a reminder of what the old Kino disc looked like, and that's what you're going to run into with any of the vintage extras that are legacy extras, that they're going to be also representing what the film looked and sounded like on that video release at that time. But like the Tim Lucas commentary, I'm so glad Arrow was able to get this to include here, because it's a fantastic interview and just a treat to revisit, even if you've seen it before. Then we have all of the legacy extras from MGM releases. So this is everything that was done for their special edition DVD, and then also the Blu-ray. So most of these are in standard definition, and they basically look about as good as they can. They were really well made and edited back in the day. They were originally done all the way back in 2003, but didn't get released here in the US until the 2007 special edition DVD release. But the first one was the only one in HD and was done for the Blu-ray release. This is the Frayling Archives, which runs just under 20 minutes, and it's Sir Christopher Frayling going through his own personal archive of original posters and publicity materials for A Fistful of Dollars, and talking also about the film's overall release history, while also giving a nice documentation of just how long he's been researching these films and been a fan of these films. This is the only MGM extra that's in HD, and it looks quite nice here on the Arrow release, so it's been presented well and properly encoded. The only thing with this extra that will throw any sort of collector is that Frayling is going through his priceless poster collection, and it's just like draped over couches and coffee tables, and he's just holding up, and here's the Italian one sheet, and here's the UK quad poster. Then he just sets stuff down. like anybody would just in their own private house. But as a collector, you'll see this and you're sitting there going, wait, why isn't there a box or a protective sheet or something? But it's also nice how informal it is. But it's wonderful this has been included, and it's in HD. It's the only one of the MGM extras that is. So everything else is from the MGM DVD originally and is in standard definition. All of these are obviously going to be a bit noisy looking, but they look as good as they can, and they've been well encoded. That's also a really important thing, because on the past Kino releases, when the MGM extras were included, they did have a number of frame rate and encoding issues, so they didn't look and sound very good, and both the MGM supplements and all the trailers and such usually had a sort of herky-jerky motion to them because the frame rate was incorrect and they were not encoded on the disc properly. So thankfully, that is not an issue on the Arrow release. So that's another improvement and reason to upgrade if you didn't have enough of those, that all of the legacy extras are properly presented and encoded here when they weren't on both of the Kino releases. So the MGM extras include, of course, A New Kind of Hero, which is the 23-minute interview with Sir Christopher Frayling, specifically talking about A Fistful of Dollars. We have the Clint Eastwood interview, A Few Weeks in Spain, where they got Eastwood to actually sit down and talk about his experiences on this film. He basically talked about each of the 3 films in one sitting, and then they just cut it into 3 less than 10-minute featurettes. We have the piece Not Ready for Prime Time, which runs about 7 minutes, where Monty Hellman talks about his experience being tasked with shooting a prologue for the network television broadcast premiere of the film. This was done to give a purpose for the man with no name riding into San Miguel, basically operating as a sort of unofficial government agent to clean up the town, and thus give the film a certain morality the network felt was essential for its television airing. This, of course, was done on a shoestring budget, but Hellman was able to get his friend Harry Dean Stanton to appear in it, and of course using a stand-in wearing a sort of similar poncho and trying to act at his most Clint Eastwood-like. It's a fascinating thing to be able to look at, and it was great they got Hellman to actually recount his experience. Then you have the actual prologue itself, which was only preserved when a fan recorded it back in the day, and it's seemingly the only version of this that survives. It's, of course, low quality due to being transferred, I think, from a Betamax recording, but it's amazing to be able to have and actually look at this, as there were a great number of films that had unique bits of material or bridging material to either make aspects of a film more palatable to a television broadcast or to extend the runtime to fill a TV slot. And these were often not preserved. So we do have this here, and since it was put out on the MGM DVD, I think it's kind of become infamous in a way, and now people are actually aware that the film did have this rather ill-advised but, at least impressive for what it is, and having no money and no time to make prologue from the original network broadcast. Then we have a roughly 6-minute piece called Restoration Italian Style, with John Kirk talking about MGM's initial attempts to restore the film for the special edition DVD that was then later delayed and didn't come out until 2007. This, of course, resulted in an HD master that later turned up on MGM's rather deficient, disappointing Blu-ray. Now, this is where you get some visuals and information about the sources MGM always had, and it is discussed how they always only had interpositives and prints that were generations away from the original negative to work with. And so when they did their restoration attempt and made their new restored video master, it was using these elements and mixing them together. They also talk about how they did a brand new sound remix and cleaned up the original mono, which they felt was deficient. This is also where the film's audio took a great hit, as the 5.1 remix was revisionist and changed some things around and also introduced some sound effect placement changes and such, but also the original mono was no longer included, as the mono track on those MGM releases was merely a fold down of the remix. So this was also the point where some new problems got introduced in terms of an archival presentation of the film, and helps to explain where the film was at that point and why it looked and sounded a certain way on all the MGM video releases, and in particular explaining the process behind the 2007 MGM Special Edition DVD and then the 2010 Blu-ray version of that master. We have a nice location comparisons reel that was done in 2004, so showing you the difference between some of the original shooting locations 40 years later. Then there's a lovely interview piece called Three Voices. This is a 3-part interview that runs about 12 minutes with Mickey Knox, who supervised the translation of the Italian for the English dubs, as he was based in Italy, and helped the films to have their requisite and necessary American flavor to the dialogue. But also screenwriter Sergio Donati, who's one of Leone's key collaborators, and producer Alberto Grimaldi, who produced For a Few Dollars More and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. So thankfully, their insights in this interview compilation is also included. So we have all of the MGM Legacy extras. Arrow has also included alternate title sequences from some of the other foreign versions. So we have in HD the German title sequence with the custom German titles. This basically looks the same as the German Blu-ray that I have that otherwise used the 2007 Italian restoration, but it did have the German title. So what's here in HD is basically the HD German title sequence that you have on the German disc. So this is a wonderful inclusion. It's obviously not something they had to do, but a wonderful example of Arrow going the extra mile to include a version of the custom German title sequence in HD. And of course, this has all of the names in the Americanized form except for Leone's credit. It shows all the various lower quality versions that the iconic title music can have in terms of the film mix and how it's never sounded all that great across all the different versions. Then we have what's labeled the original English language credits. This has all the Americanized names and the Bob Robertson credit for Leone. It is lower quality. It looks like it's coming from an old standard definition source perhaps, but it is in scope and is probably the best surviving version that Arrow could access. The only thing is that when it shows the end title card, because these also show the end title card, it switches to a much lower quality source because it's not the original United Artists end credit. It's an original English language end credit without the UA credit information. So I don't know where they accessed this from, but they took the time and went to the extra effort of sourcing the original English language credits with the Americanized Bob Robertson credit, even though they had to go to lower quality to do it. And then they managed to find the original English language end title card before the United Artists credit was put on. So I did not expect that. I just figured it was, probably coming from the old MGM Laserdisc or 1999 DVD. But then seeing that pop, it was like, whoa, didn't expect that to be there. Then we have what's labeled the Italian release credits, which is a mixture of quality and does have some unique title cards and credits not found in the feature version Italian credits. So this is a nice alternative credit sequence. I'm not sure if this is original or a reissue perhaps, as again, some of the title cards are different, but it's really nice to have this preserved as well. Then we close out with not one, but 3 different image galleries, which are all in HD with really nice high-resolution images, and this is split into 3 different programs. These are A Fistful in Pictures, On the Set, and Promoting A Fistful of Dollars. So you have all of the vintage publicity stills, tons of on-set images, and of course images of the posters, the advertising campaigns, and all of the other bits of the marketing campaigns for not just the American release, but all the foreign releases. So that is the Arrow Video Limited Edition 4K UHD and Blu-ray release of Sergio Leone's masterpiece, A Fistful of Dollars, the first film in the iconic Dollars trilogy. This is the release that myself and all Sergio Leone fans have always dreamed of happening, but given the film's lifetime of element problems, of preservation problems, and of course compounded by its lifetime of video history and presentation problems, and being divided between two different sets of rights holders in two different countries and having elements spread between those two different countries, it always meant that getting a release like this was something that was probably never going to happen. And so I think most of us had kind of given up hope that this might ever see the light of day. And for Arrow to be able to step in and put in all this effort and do all this work and go to all these links and produce what is finally a proper, comprehensive video release that does its darndest to overcome long-standing issues and supplant all of the video releases of the past is truly something to celebrate. This isn't merely just a video upgrade over the Kino Lorber releases. This is the product of a great deal of time and effort from many different people, not just at Arrow Video, but also getting the approvals and elements from MGM and also from the Italian rights holders and from Ritrovata, and getting all of the legacy extras together, but also crucially getting involved with the fan preservation community and the Leone experts and Leone historians to try and ensure this is as good as it possibly can be. Is it 100% perfect? No, but I didn't really expect that because it's practically impossible to get these films in an absolutely perfect presentation given their lifetime of element and preservation issues, compounded again by their video problems across all of home video history. But this is the first release where everyone involved tried their darndest to get it as good as humanly possible. And it is extraordinarily close to being definitive and perfect. It is certainly the definitive home video release and definitive presentation that we've had. No other home video version comes close. No previous restoration comes close to this. This even manages to surpass my impressions I still have from seeing the 2007 Italian restoration, which I saw on 35mm. I've seen the film in just about every format possible, short of seeing an original 1960s print preserved. And that 2007 print was always the version I carried in my head of being what I sort of stacked everything up against. Again, I haven't seen it in a great number of years, so I'm having to sort of carry my memories of that. But that was the time I was completely blown away by how good the visuals could look. And that didn't have some of the quirks that the home video versions, in terms of the Italian and German Blu-rays, had of that same restoration. And I was never a fan of the Kino Lorber releases, even though they were coming from the Ritrovata negative scan, because the first go around had the horrible revisionist color, and they both had the horrible botched mono mix in terms of the English mono restoration that was terribly botched. So I was stuck, of course, having to revisit the film on the best of past releases, which really meant going all the way back to the MGM DVD, which had of course the film in widescreen, and it was still mostly based around the old Laserdisc master, but it had better audio than the widescreen Laserdisc had. But overall, the best audio I found was on the Pan and Scan 1985 Laserdisc, but to actually restore that to a different transfer of the film, you had to actually get into editing the audio and mixing that with a different source, primarily the 1999 DVD. So you had to make your own version, and so I was either watching an old release or trying to cobble together my own version with other fans. So now having this Arrow presentation, which really does the best it can with the Ritrovata negative scan and does as much as humanly possible to make that shine and make this as much of an archival release as humanly possible, it's really something to celebrate. It does as good as it can. Yes, there's a quirk in the picture and audio that I think is tied to this being from Ritrovata Elements. I wish those weren't there, but thankfully they are much more minor than they could be, and Arrow really has exceeded themselves in terms of the efforts they put into this, the overall beautiful packaging, the beautiful artwork, and the incredible supplements that also manage to get every last supplement from pre-existing releases on here and properly encoded. So again, when I say that this makes all past releases obsolete, I'm not joking. The only thing you might want to hang on to if you're like me and you have way too many copies of A Fistful of Dollars on your shelf is the 1985 pan and scan Laserdisc for the completely raw, hands-off audio transfer. But again, keep in mind that's of rough, direct mixing and matching of different prints, and it's not a complete version. But I think it's important to have the completely raw, as is, sort of original home video iteration, but it's also how the title sequence audio was restored for the Arrow version. So outside of the 1985 pan and scan Laserdisc, you can pretty much replace everything else, and you can certainly replace the Kino Lorber releases. So if you were wondering, is this an upgrade? Hell yes. Is this necessary? Hell yes. This is such a substantial improvement in all areas and at such an affordable asking price that it is absolutely essential. And I can't wait to see the upcoming releases of the other two films because they're being staggered. And so we will eventually be able to have these beautiful Arrow limited edition presentations side by side on the shelf exactly where they belong. And if you're like me, they will go alongside the long home video history it has taken to get to these Arrow releases. So I want to summarize this rather lengthy review by saying that the Arrow release of A Fistful of Dollars is not merely a Blu-ray and 4K UHD upgrade of the iconic Sergio Leone masterpiece Western and the First of the Dollars trilogy. This is a complete overhaul, an attempt to finally make a release that approaches something that can be labeled archival, a release that tries its darndest to undo as many problems as it can that date back all the way to the film's original 1964 release, and undo all of the home video problems that this film has had throughout its entire history, going back to the dawn of physical media. So if you want any one release of this film in your collection, it has to be the Arrow release. It does make all past releases obsolete, and the improvement even over the Kino Lorber UHD is a quantum leap forward in picture, sound, packaging, extras, and supplements, and all at a relatively affordable asking price. So I do recommend people to go ahead and grab this while the limited edition is still available. However, Arrow will eventually transition to a standard edition with the same outstanding discs once the limited edition sells out. Of course, Arrow is limited to only Region B for selling this, so you will have to import this here in the US as Kino Lorber still retains rights, but I would advise everyone you need to get the Arrow version. Do not stick with the Kino versions, as they cannot even begin to compare to the Arrow presentation, which absolutely leaves them in the dust. So definitely do yourself a favor and upgrade your collection with the incredible Arrow effort, either by going to Arrow's website or by choosing one of the wonderful independent retailers here in the US who do such a fantastic job at selling us wonderful import titles such as Orbit or the Atomic Movie Store. So those are my thoughts on the Arrow Video 4K UHD and Blu-ray release of A Fistful of Dollars from their incredible new restoration efforts. This truly is the one comprehensive definitive release of the film on physical media in terms of everything we've ever seen. It is as good as I think it can be, and the only way this could really be improved upon is if the powers that be in terms of the rights holders basically started from scratch and did a brand new negative scan to maybe overcome some of the fleeting quirks of the original Ritrovata negative scan, but it would be such an extreme cost and probably not enough benefit to justify that. So Arrow going in and going to the raw files and doing all this work on their own and collaborating with everybody that they could and generating this comprehensive package really is the kind of effort we've always dreamed about but never thought would happen. Is it 100% perfect? No, but it's darn close, and they tried their darndest, and that's what we've always wished for and hoped for, and that's all we've ever really asked for as Leone fans, because that's what these films deserve, and they've never gotten that. They've gotten restoration efforts before, but not ones that really tried to get everything right and tried to do their absolute best with what materials survive. And it's sad that it's taken this long to get something like that, But we've finally gotten it, and this is merely the first of the 3 films, and all 3 films have been given this treatment. So now the hope is that, maybe Arrow can get their hands on the rights to the other films, whether it be Paramount and Once Upon a Time in the West to undo that debacle of the umpteenth restoration that couldn't get things right, or maybe to solve the Gordian knot of problems that curse Duck You Sucker, which is the Leone film in greatest need of restoration, or perhaps Arrow might be able to tackle someday Once Upon a Time in America. But the thought that the Dollars trilogy has now been given treatment like this is truly stunning and something none of us thought would ever happen. So please do yourself a favor. Please do check these out. They are not merely physical media upgrades. They are upgrades to the film's overall preservation status and should be considered as such. They are such a night and day improvement over everything that's come before that they are truly essential. So don't miss out on these just because you have to import them or you have to have a region-free player to play the extras disc. They are truly important, and I cannot stress how much work has gone into these. Even though my contribution was small, I'm still flabbergasted that I was able to contribute in some small way and in some part make something of my lifetime of adoring these films and admiring the work of Sergio Leone and getting into the never-ending rabbit hole of trying to find out the history and preservation status of these films. So at least my 20 years or so of trying to figure out this stuff has been put to some good use finally. So as always, I hope my babblings about the incredible works of Sergio Leone and their long history in terms of preservation and physical media releases has been at least somewhat fun and informative. Please do keep supporting the incredible efforts of Arrow Video and others who go to such incredible lengths to do the best they can in preserving our cinematic heritage by buying films on disc, because in doing that, you're ensuring to help both preserve physical media, but also film culture itself. So as we ride into the wonderful ghost town of San Miguel once again, I want to say, as always, thank you ever so much for watching.
You mean the release is derived from MGM masters on one side? Maybe the release is derived from Italian masters on the other side? And the Arrow release right in the middle? Too dangerous. So long.
It's nearly impossible to get clear dialogue with a pretzel rod in your mouth, let alone a cheroot.
How may we thank you for what you are doing?
Don't try. Just get going before the Ritrovatas get here.
Why do you do this for us?
Why? 'Cause I knew a film like you once, and there was no one there to help. Now get moving. Get moving. Get out of here. You better get back to your shop, old video master. You're liable to have some business.
Very good. That's what I wanted to hear. And I have a little surprise for you that I brought along. It's the raw 4K scan files. I stole it from the Ritrovatas. And now it seems to me the moment's come for you to light the archival fuse and send it back to them.
Gringo label! Heard you wanted to see me. The label's dead. Let the old DVD down. What's wrong, Ritrovata? You losing your touch? Are you afraid, Ritrovata? You shoot to kill a film, you better hit the heart. Your own words, Ritrovata. The heart, Ritrovata. Don't forget the heart. Aim for the heart or you'll never stop me. When a label with an archival work ethic meets a rights holder with a revisionist 4K master, you said the label with the archival mindset's a dead label. Let's see if that's true. Go ahead, load up and master. This UHD with HDR belongs to the Arrow Video Limited Edition. This exclusive restoration belongs to the Arrow Video Limited Edition. This limited box set and slipcover belongs to the Arrow Video Limited Edition. The Arrow Video Limited Edition. Preservation fits it like a tight, limited slipcover. It is perhaps the most archival release of this film that ever lived. A Fistful of Dollars is restored by Arrow Video. It's going to trigger a whole new style of getting Sergio Leone's films properly presented. A Fistful of Dollars limited edition 4K UHD and restoration by Arrow Video. It's the first release of its kind. It won't be the last.